About 10 years ago, after participating in an after-school program at Chase Park House, Tom Pannone drove across the street to observe the house where one of his former students lived. He vented his frustrations about the troubling situation to his wife, as he had done many times before. Despite his efforts, he couldn't determine what had happened to the boy or secure the help that educators at Barnard Elementary School believed he needed. Tom warned his wife, "I don't know where this kid is, but I'm telling you right now, we're going to see this story on Dateline sometime." When listening to Tom discuss the ominous signs he was haunted by back then, his frustration over the Connecticut Department of Children and Families' refusal to step in to save this young student who was so clearly suffering remains a powerful force that hasn't dimmed a bit since the boy was pulled out of school over a decade ago, effectively ending Tom's interactions with him. In an interview for NBC Connecticut, Tom Pannone, the former principal of Barnard Elementary School, insisted everyone really was concerned with this child since he was 5 years old. You knew something was wrong. It was grossly wrong.
It makes you wonder, how many red flags does it take before they actually take action?
Right. And sadly, Tom's worries would prove to be all too valid. It would take years before Tom would find out what had happened to that 4th grade student he was so concerned about. But on February 17th of 2025, a house fire would finally prove to be the spark needed to bring the truth to light, exposing the horrors of a stepmother whose cruelty goes well beyond anything the writers of those fairy tales could imagine, and the complete failure of a system that should have stepped in to rescue this vulnerable boy decades ago. Hey, Crime Sat listeners. So today we are going to explore what happened to that young boy who inspired such concern and care among the staff at Barnard Elementary School, and how a house fire in Waterbury, Connecticut exposed the Sullivan family's darkest secrets. The victim in this case has yet to be named, and it's possible that his identity will never be released to the public. So we'll do our best to be clear about who we're referring to throughout today's episode, but we do apologize in advance for any confusion. My name's Ashley.
And I'm Ricky.
And, well, let's jump in. Now, inspired by the passionate anger I noticed while listening to NBC's interview with Tom Pannone, we'll also dig deeper into DCF's involvement, or lack of, in this case. After all, Tom did state, quote, "In my 35 years, 13 as an administrator, DCF dropped the ball 99% of the time. It's just the reality of the agency. I know every year they say they're changing, they're going to make corrections. I don't believe it," unquote.
Yeah, and coming from someone who works so closely with them, it tells you that this isn't just a one-off case. This is a pattern.
Yeah, and this is a pretty strong statement, coming from the former principal of an elementary school. 99%? And it made me curious to know, does he have a reason to feel this way? Does the Connecticut Department of Children and Families truly have such a terrible track record, caring for those their sole job is to protect? Or was Tom exaggerating? I mean, could it have been his emotions heightened by his personal relationship with the victim?
Yeah, it's really hard to say.
So before we share the answers that we found while researching this case, please be advised that this episode does include discussions of child abuse, neglect, drug use, sexual abuse, and the deaths of several children. If any of these topics are sensitive for you, you may want to skip this episode and tune in next week instead. For now, we'll turn our attention back to the night a fire in Waterbury, Connecticut, exposed the decades-long horrors endured by the student Tom Pannone will never forget. On February 17th of 2025, a desperate 32-year-old man decided to risk it all to escape the nightmarish prison he had been trapped in. A room in an unassuming house that had become something like a cell in a dungeon for him. His key to freedom consisted of a lighter, hand sanitizer, and paper. His dangerous, desperate plan required the courage to accept the possibility of death by fire or smoke inhalation. But after years of abuse, starvation, and neglect, the severely malnourished man was willing to take his chances.
And that just shows you how bad it actually was for him, because he literally had two choices: either stay in the house or burn to death. And he picked fire. Like, that is horrible.
Yeah, it's beyond horrifying. Locked in a room, he had no way of escaping. I mean, think about that. He set his house on fire. His only chance of making it out alive depended on who would win the life-threatening race he had just started. It all came down to the Waterbury Fire Department versus the flames that the victim was trapped in. Either way, set free by flames, smoke, or hero, he was going to escape his torturous confinement.
And it's crazy that this is what it took. I mean, no one was coming to save him. He literally had to save himself, even if it meant putting his own life in danger.
Right. So it was 8:40 p.m. around that time. It was a Monday night. Waterbury firefighters and police officers, they raced to Kimberly Sullivan's house, responding to a call about a house fire. Kimberly evacuated the house, but her stepson remained trapped among the flames as firefighters worked to extinguish the fire. As the fire was brought under control, firefighters went into the house to find Kimberly's stepson, only to be confronted by something much more gruesome than the flames they had just battled. Among the smoke and the ashes was a weak, dirty, malnourished 32-year-old man with rotten teeth and matted hair. Standing at 5 feet 9 inches tall, he weighed only 68 pounds.
Oh my God, 68 pounds at almost 6 feet tall? That's not neglect. That's just systematic long-term torture.
Yeah, I mean, to put that into perspective, the average weight of a 10-year-old boy is 70 and a half pounds.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the healthy weight for a 32-year-old at like 6'2", I mean, that's something like 144 to 176 pounds.
Right.
Like, this is tiny, tiny.
68 pounds.
So that means a literal child would have weighed more than him.
Yeah.
And then the DCF, the police, all these agencies, they miss that? Like, come on.
It's truly unfathomable to me how anyone can torture another human in such a horrendous state, let alone how the victim even survived it. 68 pounds at almost 6 foot. Yet, even after being locked in a room that was set on fire and abused for decades, the victim made it out of that house alive. It was immediately clear that he had been saved from far more than just that fire that day.
Right. This fire wasn't just about escaping. It was about being seen. I mean, he had been invisible for 20 years. Now, there was no ignoring what happened to him.
It was probably the most shocking thing that some of these first responders have ever seen in their lives.
I agree. Yeah.
Now, despite suffering from the effects of smoke inhalation and exposure to the fire, the brave victim, he didn't waste any time in securing his freedom. He admitted to the first responders that he had started the fire in a desperate attempt to escape conditions that the Waterbury police chief would go on to describe as the worst treatment of humanity he has ever seen during his 33 years in law enforcement. The victim explained that he had been held captive in this house for about 20 years, starting when he was pulled out of school when he was only 11 years old, just about to start 5th grade.
That's just insane to me. And like, when you really think about it, he was so young when this happened. And this is decades and decades of him growing up. I mean, there's generations of kids. They're growing up, they're graduating, all while he's locked in a room. He hasn't experienced anything.
No.
Like, people have lived almost their entire life. Like, most of the key milestones in life have been achieved, right?
Yeah.
Like, we've seen all these things, and he's just been locked in a room, ripped off of his entire life.
Yeah.
It's just cruel.
And so the victim's statement launched the start of an investigation that would expose the truly sadistic treatment the young man had been subjected to throughout most of his life. Freed of the room he had been locked in for decades, Kimberly Sullivan's stepson could finally share his story. And what he'd have to say turned out to be utterly horrifying. Starting from when he was only 3 years old, Kimberly's stepson can remember sneaking out of his room at night in hopes of finding some leftover food or something to drink. They eventually caught on and resorted to locking the victim in his room at night.
And 3 years old, let that sink in. I mean, most toddlers are learning their ABCs or they're playing with blocks. I mean, this kid was being deprived of basic necessities.
Yeah, this level of cruelty is just beyond comprehension. And what he went through got so bad that he actually started to drink water from the toilet, and he started to dig through the trash for food.
Jesus.
The lock on his door became a permanent fixture, one that was upgraded throughout the years as the boy got older to keep him from finding a way to escape.
It's like they weren't just abusing him. They were evolving their methods too, making sure that he couldn't get out, making sure that he had no chance at freedom. This wasn't just neglect. This was calculated control.
Yeah, and by the time he started school, the effects of the abuse were so apparent that the staff at Barnard Elementary School, they quickly took notice. Tom Pannone, he still remembers the tiny kindergartner he met during his first year as a principal of the elementary school, and he described him as looking emaciated with no color to his face. And after noticing several concerning signs that something wasn't right with this child, such as catching the boy drinking toilet water or carrying around a disgusting lunchbox, stealing other students' food, clearly starving, Tom, he reached out to the boy's mother, a decision he now says was probably the worst thing he could have possibly done. And the child's mother always assured Tom that she would take care of it. Everything was fine.
I mean, you have professionals, educators, people who genuinely care about kids, and they're all reporting their concerns, and yet the system still fails them.
Every single time.
Exactly, and we've seen this so many times before, too.
Right. However, throughout the child's years of attending elementary school, the adults around him continued to notice these clear signs of abuse, realizing at some point that talking to the parents wasn't going to do anything. It wasn't going to fix anything. DCF was called a first time, then another, and another, at least 20 times. And, well, you get the picture.
I mean, what more could the teachers have done? They called the DCF, 20 times? What point are they going to step in?
Yeah, when does it become negligence on their part? And this wasn't just some isolated concern. This was ongoing. 20 different calls, a glaring red flag that was ignored time and time again.
Exactly. I mean, this wasn't the teachers. This was the actual agencies.
Right. And Tom, the principal, he explained that they couldn't seem to get anywhere with this agency. No one was willing to step in and remove this boy from this home. Then a chilling change brought an end to the cycle of reporting the Sullivans to DCF, only to see that the child remained in the same horrible living situation. After attending Barnard from kindergarten through 4th grade, the victim didn't return to start the new school year, heading into 5th grade with his fellow classmates as he should have. In fact, the boy was nowhere to be found.
That right there should have been the breaking point. A child disappears and no one follows up. The fact that he was pulled out of school should have sent alarm bells ringing through the system.
And the only one who seemed to be observant of all of this was the principal, Tom, and the employees at the school. Tom, he asked other students if they maybe have seen the boy, and a few children, they claimed that they had actually seen him standing at the window of his house, looking back at them and waving, but they never saw him leave his house. Now, at this point, Tom, he claims that his concerns for the child led him to reach out to the police department at least 2 or 3 times, if not more, for wellness checks. He insists that he gave statements explaining the many red flags he had noticed. Going so far as to follow up with the school Kimberly claimed her son was now attending to confirm that they had no record of the boy ever going to their school. Despite his frustration and the shared consensus of those at the elementary school that something was terribly wrong, it seems that none of the professionals they reached out to took their concerns seriously. That is until the boy was found 20 years later, now a 32-year-old man who had to risk death by fire just to escape confinement that the police chief would go on to describe as worse than the conditions of a jail cell. Apparently, after getting fed up with being reported to DCF several times, the Sullivans decided to take the 11-year-old boy out of school and keep him locked up, out of sight of anyone who might dare to ask any questions. He was deprived of the escape attending school once offered, and the boy's life just got significantly worse. Since being rescued from the fire and the House of Horrors, the victim has told investigators that Kimberly kept him locked up in an 8-by-9-foot room most of the time, only allowing him out to do chores. And these chores typically granted him anywhere between 15 minutes to 2 hours of a break from the room turned prison cell, which had no heat in the winter and also no air conditioner in the summer, before he was locked away again. His only true break came on the weekends when his father sometimes allowed him to watch TV or to help him with the yard work while his stepmother and sisters were gone. Yet, even that glimmer of mercy was stolen from him when his father died in January of 2024, having been wheelchair-bound leading up to his death. That's when the victim says that his days of captivity and abuse at the hands of Kimberly got even worse. He was given 2 sandwiches and 2 small bottles of water, which he also had to use along with newspapers to take care of his waste in lieu of a proper bathroom. No longer granted even a sliver of relief from his father, the victim was only let out for 1 minute a day to take the family's dog out to the backyard. Kimberly kept him locked in his room from anywhere between 22 to 24 hours a day.
Wow.
And he was terrified that Kimberly would further restrict what little food and time outside of his room that he was given if he upset her. The victim didn't dare even try to reach out to anyone for help. When talking about the hunger that plagued him, the victim said it was something he experienced all day, every day, my entire life. As horrific as his living conditions were, he did what he could do to make the most out of his grim situation. The victim bathed himself when he could, using clean water from a bottle he kept separate from the one he used as a makeshift urinal, though he wasn't given shampoo or soap to wash with. He kept track of time listening to the radio that was kept outside of his bedroom, his only real connection to the outside world. He also used a handful of books that he was given each year to his advantage. Despite having been pulled out of school before he could even attend 5th grade, he educated himself with these books and a dictionary. And Ricky, people like you and I, we read for fun or as a form of escapism. But this young man, he took this concept a step further. He explained to police that reading was how he knew hand sanitizer was flammable, which ultimately inspired his escape plan.
Knowledge is power.
And in this case, the victim used his self-taught skills, resourcefulness, cleverness, and courage to fight for freedom.
It's actually super impressive.
It is. Now, when discussing this case with reporters, the Waterbury police chief spoke about the importance of speaking up whenever anyone notices signs of abuse. He referred to the well-known motto, "If you see something, say something," and explained that investigators had spoken to many witnesses already, and though some had reported the signs of abuse they had seen, others hadn't. He added that sometimes it takes multiple calls from concerned citizens and visits from professionals before a child can be saved from an abusive household.
Okay, that's great in theory, but the problem is people did speak up. They spoke up multiple times. And none of it mattered, right?
Mm-mm.
I mean, that's the real conversation we should be having. It's not about reporting, it's about accountability.
Yeah. I mean, although you should say something, if you see something, but you're right. Because at the same time, why was nothing done?
Exactly.
Now, shortly after this lecture, a reporter pushed back on the police chief's statement, pointing out, quote, "In this situation, though, it seems like, according to the police report, his life became worse because someone reported it. And after that second DCF visit, his mother pulled him from school," unquote. Though clearly a bold statement, the police chief agreed that the reporter was correct, but went on to say that it's still best to report instances of abuse or suspected abuse to law enforcement. Now, of course, we wholeheartedly agree that everyone should report suspected cases of abuse to the authorities. Speaking up is essential for protecting the most vulnerable humans among us and keeping everyone safe. That's one of the reasons why we believe spreading awareness of these crimes is so important. However, similar to what you mentioned, Ricky, we also can't ignore the fact that people did speak up about the abuse they believed the boy was suffering through at the hands of his family. In fact, shortly before the police chief reminded the audience to speak up if they see signs of abuse, he admitted that the police department had been contacted twice about the Sullivan family. He explained that in 2005, DCFS requested a welfare check for the boy based on reports they had received. According to the police chief, officers went to the Sullivan house and determined that there was no cause for alarm, given that the home was clean and their conversation with the victim didn't indicate any reason to be concerned. Now, later that April, officers were called back to the house. This time, the Sullivans were the ones with a complaint. The couple claimed that certain members of the school district were harassing them by continuously reporting them to DCF, trying to get them in trouble and get them involved in an investigation. Tired of being targeted, the Sullivan family wanted to file a harassment complaint against them. Since there was no evidence that there was harassment happening, it seems nothing really came of it. I personally can't help but think that this should have been a red flag. If it was found that the members of the school district didn't have some type of underlying motive to target this family, then maybe it would have been worthwhile to investigate why the Sullivan family was being reported to DCF so frequently. When you see something, say something. Am I right? Maybe the officers were content with believing DCF workers would handle it. Of course, that never happened. Now, while researching this case, we also saw a lot of people directing at least some of the blame to the victim's sisters, who grew up in the house with him and likely had at least some idea of the abuse and torture their brother was being subjected to daily throughout most, if not all, of his life. It seems the sisters were able to come and go as they pleased. The victim himself stated that his sisters knew about his confinement, which, they absolutely should have sought help for their brother, especially once they were old enough to fully understand the cruelty of what was happening and knew how to reach out to law enforcement. However, I can't help but wonder if seeing DCF agents come to their home, investigate the reports of abuse that were made, and agree that nothing was wrong, maybe had something to do with their silence. They likely saw that their brother was treated worse after these visits. And I imagine that professionals agreeing that the claims of abuse were unfounded must have influenced their perception at least a little bit. Looking into it further, I found that studies have proven that child maltreatment can negatively influence the sibling pattern relationship in families, often resulting in more hostile and less harmonious relationships between siblings who experience or witness child abuse throughout their childhood. Siblings raised by parents who physically abuse their children are also more likely to use physical aggression against each other. Researchers have reported that siblings of severely scapegoated children often perceive that the victims deserve their abusive treatment, a belief that's reinforced by the perpetrators and paired with a notable empath deficit. Since neither of the sisters have spoken publicly about the case, it's possible to know for sure why they didn't seek help for their brother or what role they played in his captivity. What we do know is Despite Tom Panone's claims that the staff at Barnard Elementary School called DCF to report suspicions of abuse at least 20 times, no one stepped in to save the boy from the horrific treatment he was subjected to daily. It seems that over the years, the boy was forgotten about by the adults who get paid to keep an eye on at-risk children like him. That is, until he found the bravery to free himself. As I mentioned before, the apparent disdain Tom expressed while talking about DCF during his interview with NBC made me curious, so I did a little digging and found enough instances of fatal failures on the part of DCF to believe that Tom had a good reason to doubt the agency. DCF offices across the country have been under a lot of scrutiny for years now, and the Connecticut Department of Children and Families is no different. Crystal, a 29-year-old from Bristol, is just one of many who feel let down by DCF after they let her in the hands of a predator who subjected her to over a decade of sexual abuse, starting when Crystal was just 9 years old. In 2008, DCF endorsed and approved Roger and Darlene Berriolt's application for guardianship of Crystal when she, as the victim, was only 6 months pregnant with Roger's baby, a child she had conceived when she was only 12 years old. According to the legal claim, despite the reports, tips, referrals, complaints, concerns, suspicions, reasonable belief, and her pregnancy, DCF failed to take any meaningful action. After Crystal found the courage to report the abuse to the Bristol Police Department in 2023, 64-year-old Roger Berriolt was finally charged with first-degree sexual assault after raping Crystal approximately 3,800 to 4,000 times. Roger's wife, Darlene, was charged with risk of injury to a minor, as she knew about the abuse but did nothing to intervene. And Crystal doesn't think that the couple are the only ones who should face consequences for the trauma she endured for all those years. She believes that DCF should also, quite literally, pay for the role they played in allowing the abuse to continue. Due to their negligence, when she was most vulnerable, Crystal decided to legal action against the Connecticut DCF in the form of a $30 million claim against them. And so, in response to Crystal's case, DCF Commissioner Jody Hill Lilly has claimed, quote, "The department had no involvement with the child or any of the involved families between 2003 to 2006. Also, Mr. Berriolt and his wife were never licensed foster parents for the department, and the now adult victim was not placed into the home of Roger Berriolt by the department," unquote. However, records prove that the agency received a report in 2006 alleging that Roger Berriolt was sexually abusing a child in the home. Another caller identified as a DCF worker reported similar concerns. The Connecticut Office of the Child Advocate, or OCA, weighed in on the matter, issuing a report that detailed all the chances DCF had and failed to protect Crystal. They made several recommendations on things that could be done to better protect children in the future. This is far from the only time that the Connecticut DCF has fallen under such scrutiny. Following the deaths of 2-year-old Liam Riviera, whose battered body was found in a Stamford park on January 2, 2023, and 10-month-old Marcelo Mellows, who died from fentanyl, xylazine, and cocaine intoxication less than 6 months later on June 25, 2023. The OCA released a report that pointed out accountability concerns they found within DCF and made specific recommendations to improve each of the agencies involved. The families of both boys were involved in child abuse neglect cases with DCF leading up to the children's deaths. Both boys ultimately were killed by the very adults that had histories of putting their children's lives at risk, but were somehow trusted to care for their vulnerable sons, time and time again. These children are, unfortunately, just a few examples of the countless times DCF has failed to protect children they've been warned are in risky living situations. And the list goes on for much longer than we have time to cover here. It includes children such as Matthew Terrido, whose death by child abuse was reported on by OCA in 2017. And DCF actually got the green light to close his case just a month before he starved to death. On top of that, the mother, who was responsible for her child's death, legally denied DCF a number of times, allowing her to hide the abuse she was inflicting on this child, Matthew. I think it was 26 times she denied DCF. In 2022, OCA issued a separate report on Alex Medina, who died while in foster care. And only a year later, in 2023, OCA turned their attention to Kaylee, who died of fentanyl intoxication when she was just a year old. All of these children were in the care of families who were involved in cases with DCF leading up to their deaths. Their deaths likely could have been prevented if DCF had stepped up and placed the children in safe homes by responsible, trustworthy adults. Despite yet another failure on the Connecticut DCF's part, Kimberly Sullivan's stepson beat the odds and made it out alive. Yet I can't help but question, did his suffering really need to last 3 decades before he was removed from his abuser? If this brave victim who was suffering didn't do anything about it, today he would still have been locked up in that room, hidden from the world, or he would have succumbed to his abuse, possibly starved to death. So again, I know I sound a little redundant, but it's a big deal. It's a problem how many children must suffer and even lose their lives as they wait for the agency to step up and protect them as it's supposed to. Who is really there to protect children from child abuse? So shifting our attention back to the Sullivan case, nothing can make up for the decades that the innocent boy, now a man, spent trapped in a torturous isolation. But we can find a sort of glowing hope for a future where a long-suffering victim is finally granted some version of justice and forever freedom. Following the fire, Kimberly Sullivan was arrested on Wednesday, March 12th of 2025 for the prolonged abuse, starvation, severe neglect, and inhumane treatment she inflicted on her stepson. Her bond was set at $300,000. By Thursday afternoon, March 13th, she had already posted bail and was released without even being placed on house arrest or ordered to wear any type of monitoring device. So essentially, for the time being, Kimberly is free, while her victim is still recovering from the trauma she inflicted on him. Make it make sense. Her next court date is scheduled for March 26th, 2025. The charges she's currently facing include first-degree assault, second-degree kidnapping, first-degree unlawful restraint, first-degree reckless endangerment, and cruelty to persons. The most serious of these charges, first-degree assault and second-degree kidnapping, are both Class B felonies under the Connecticut law. A conviction of first-degree assault can result in a prison sentence of up to 20 years with a 5-year mandatory minimum prison sentence that cannot be reduced or suspended, and up to $15,000 in fines. Second-degree kidnapping comes with a mandatory minimum of 3 years behind bars. Though the prison sentence can go up to a maximum of 20 years and a fine of up to $15,000, it's hard to fathom how, even if Kimberly does get arrested, to at least 20 years in prison for what she did to her stepson. Her suffering still won't even come close to what she put that poor boy through. And for this next part, just brace yourself because you're probably going to get a little angry. Kimberly's attorney has said that Kimberly was stunned by the allegations as she's never been in trouble or harmed anyone before, and claims that her stepson had free reign of the house. The attorney stated, quote, "She denies these allegations, and I would just ask people not to rush to judgment here. We're confident as the facts come out, she will be vindicated," unquote. But honestly, we'll just have to let the actions speak for itself. I can't imagine a single explanation that would vindicate Kimberly at this point. I mean, her stepson, 68 pounds at the age of 32. That's just crazy. He didn't have any free reign at all. He wasn't able to go out of his house. He didn't have a toothbrush. He didn't do his hair. He didn't have soap. But maybe I'm just rushing to judgment. But most of the disclosure I've seen around this case seems to be in agreement, aside from Kimberly and her attorney, of course. Evaluations and assessments of the victim's physical and mental health have been noted several physical limitations along with PTSD and depression. The police chief has stated that it will take time for the victim to heal from everything he's been through. But he's surrounded by people who are more than willing to help him through it. And the police chief also pointed out that the lead detectives on this case are being particularly supportive of the victim. The Criminal Investigations Bureau came together to provide the man with the material items he needed to settle into his hard-earned freedom, such as new clothes, books, among other things. The police chief also acknowledged that the victim has a long road ahead of him, but says that there is a plan to continue to support him throughout. Well, we hope so. Sometimes hearing about case after case of children being abused and ignored by the systems put in place to protect them can get disheartening. I feel this is especially true when we learn about abusers who are reported to DCF yet are allowed to continue to harm the children in their care, with no one stepping in to stop them until it's too late. We're taught about the signs to look out for. If you see something, say something. But what happens when people keep speaking up and their voices go unheard? Despite this frustration, this is far too important to give up on and be silent. When the concerns of the community are continuously dismissed, I think it becomes even more important than ever to get louder, demand justice, scream your frustrations from the rooftops if you have to. And I know cases involving children are so hard to talk about, they're hard to listen to. But I mean, think about how important this is. We have to push for change. What protection do they have? If the system isn't working, we need to demand better. If you're concerned that a child you know is being abused, don't hesitate to call or text 800-422-4453 to get in touch with the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline, or reach out through their chat feature on their website at childhelphotline.org. The hotline will connect you with a live crisis counselor who will listen to your concerns and guide you through the best next steps. And if you want to help carry on the important conversations being had about child abuse, DCF, and how to better protect vulnerable children who all too often fall through the cracks of society's safety nets, please share today's episode on social media to spread the word. As always, your support means the world to us, and it helps us play our part in spreading awareness about these important topics. Thank you all so much for tuning in and listening to today's episode. This is something that Ricky and I are so passionate about, and we know today's case was a tough one, but we believe that's what makes it so important, and we appreciate you sticking with us through it. Stay safe, take care of yourselves, and, well, we'll catch you next week for another deep dive into the stories that need to be told.